So hello guys, how are you all? I hope you all are fine. So as you've seen in the thumbnail, today we are gonna see, what if Izuku Midoriya had ability control and manipulate time? Watch this video till the end, also like, share and subscribe to the channel. In this world, if you were powerless, if you were normal, then you were nothing. Everyone had something that made them special, stand out, be unique, and if you didn't then you were overlooked or ignored. Izuku reached out with his hand and pulled as hard as he could, causing the All Might figure to lift and float right to his hand. He had perfect control once he lifted it, and strangely enough, he could feel so many things from the figurine, but he merely picked it up and brought it to his hand before holding it in the air for everyone to see. Today was his turn to show his classmates how his quirk worked, telekinetic control over small things. Izuku wasn't powerless, in fact he was tremendously powerful. He just didn't understand by how much yet. Wow! That was amazing, Midoriya! Cheered the teacher with a large smile. Everyone give Midoriya a round of applause. We have time for one more. Hands shot into the air and Izuku rushed back to his seat so he could see what the next quirk was. He loved seeing new quirks no matter what they were. Subtle or powerful, it didn't matter. Once he saw a quirk, he would just think of all the applications of it until he exhausted himself. A boy went up to the front to show his quirk, his red wings that he used to fly around the front of the room. Izuku picked up his pencil to write down his thoughts on the wing quirk when the same feeling he felt from the figurine came from the pencil in his hand. Izuku frowned, then focused and pulled. The pencil immediately cracked and broke apart, shattering across his desk, shocking the others around him. "Hey Deku! What are you doing making a mess?" shouted the boy directly to his right. Izuku ducked his head and muttered an apology to the teacher and everyone in the room before taking out another pencil. He would have to look into that, maybe his mom would know? "Broke your pencil?" his mom repeated with a frown. "Describe it to me again, please." I felt the pencil in my hand, and it felt like there were so many little tiny things inside of it, and it was like feeling something with my quirk, but there were so many. So I pulled on a few of them and then the pencil just broke apart. Explained Izuku with wide eyes, clearly trying to show how surprising it was. Inko Midoriya was a young and attractive woman, standing a bit over 5 feet and having long green hair pulled into a ponytail. She was a well-educated woman and loved her son more than anything else in the world. As she looked down at him and his shocked little face, she got a feeling, nothing bad, just a strange feeling that nothing would be the same after today. They were scheduled to register his quirk, but that entailed a doctor's visit, and she knew they would be able to help him understand what he did with the pencil. "I'm not sure, honey, but the doctor will be able to help," she said before smiling. "I hope you've thought of a name." Izuku jumped with a wide grin. "Of course. It'll be like yours." Laughing, she grabbed his hand and led him out to their car. The doctor hummed as he wrote down his findings. Quirks generally have 3 paths they can follow: combining, where both parents give their child a piece of their quirk; mutating, where something completely new occurs; and finally enhancing, where the child inherits a stronger version of one of the parents. You see any of these all the time, and I believe young Midoriya here has a stronger version of your quirk. Inko looked at Izuku in surprise. Just what is his quirk capable of? Well, that's the thing, we don't have some way of perfectly telling you. But from some tests we ran with young Midoriya here, we can confirm that he can perfectly control what he grabs with his quirk. No trembling, no shakiness, it goes where he tells it with no problems, unlike yours, which seems to be just attracting small things to you. Explained the doctor with a curious tilt to his head. Although he seemed to have a very low weight limit, merely 5 kilograms, which is one of the weakest I've seen of telekinetic quirks, even just starting out. Usually it is how much they can physically lift or their weight or something like that. Izuku drooped at hearing that. "Does that mean I can't be a hero?" The doctor looked at him with a raised eyebrow. "Kid, there's no telling, you're still only 4 years old, so it would be pretty dumb to decide something like that right now. Quirks are like any other muscle, the more you use it the stronger it becomes." Perking up at that, Izuku smiled. "So my quirk can control really small things that dash?" The doctor quickly looked up at that. "Really small?" "Of course. Both Midoriyas looked at the doctor with surprise as he shot up and ran out of the room. "Is that good or bad, Mama?" asked Izuku with a tilt of his head. Inko chuckled nervously. Personally, she couldn't imagine a doctor running from a patient as a good thing. "I'm sure it's fine." But she wouldn't worry her son. A moment later the doctor came back with a glass of water. "Oh, you were thirsty?" nodded Izuku, getting a chuckle from the doctor. "Not quite," he said before handing the glass to Izuku. "Not to drink, it's for your test." Again, both Midoriyas looked at the doctor with confusion. "I might have an idea on your quirk. I want you to tell me what all the little things feel like and if there are different ones. Anything you can tell me," explained the doctor while picking up his clipboard. Izuku nodded and put both hands on the glass. He could feel countless little things making up the glass, but when he reached the water he felt just as many, but there were two distinct things that made up the water. He kept feeling around, up until it got too confusing and he stopped. "There are a lot of really small things that make the glass, but it's like they are stuck together. I'm sure I could move them apart. There are two different things that make the water, but if I really focus there are even more even smaller things," Izuku said with a frown, still not understanding what everything meant. "The water, try and pull one of them away," the doctor urged with a glint in his eye. Doing so, Izuku felt the same thing he always did with his quirk. Once he grabbed it, it was his to control. One of the two things making up the water was pulled, and the water slowly began to vaporize from the cup, not even leaving a dampness in the glass. Izuku looked surprised, Inko looked shocked, and the doctor had a massive grin on his face. "Last test, this will be hard, put them back." Izuku frowned and reached, but it was hard to find the two things he just separated, but he found a very small amount of them and pushed them together. After almost a minute of focus he made 3 small water drops at the bottom of the glass, to which the doctor shot forward and took the glass. "Marvelous. Astounding. Truly, my boy, you are a marvel. Do you have any idea what you are capable of?" The doctor's surprised and ecstatic shouting echoed off the walls of the small room, making the Midoriyas wince. "I played with the water?" asked Izuku with furrowed brows. The doctor roared with laughter. "Yes. Yes, you did. But not how you're thinking. My boy, you manipulated the molecules, the very building blocks of the water. You told me how you did something similar to the pencil, and that seals it. The reason your weight limit is so low is because that isn't the focus of your quirk." Inko frowned. "I don't understand. So he can unmake and then remake things?" "No. It's even more than that. If that were the case, then he would have remade the same amount of water as he unmade. My boy, I think you will be capable of manipulating matter itself. All things that make up this universe are incredibly small, and you, Izuku Midoriya, can perfectly control anything that weighs less than 5 kilograms, anything. I bet with practice and study you could manipulate atoms." The doctor took on a frantic look. "You could do anything, my boy. You asked if you could be a hero? I think you could do whatever you well please with a quirk like yours. Anything." Most of the doctor's words were flying over Izuku's head. He didn't really know what a lot of what he was talking about meant. But he understood that the doctor was telling him that he could be a hero. That made him grin, and he almost shouted with joy. But his mom was looking at him with wide eyes while nervously looking at the doctor every couple of seconds before she stood up from her chair. "Thank you, doctor, but my son and I will be leaving now. Thank you for everything you've done today." Inko forced Izuku up and to bow with her before leaving the room, trying to ignore the laughing doctor behind them. "Honey, your quirk's name is manipulation of small things, okay? Understand?" she asked him seriously, and Izuku nodded with a frown. "I need you to keep what happened with the doctor to yourself. It's better if we don't talk about it for now, okay?" Izuku frowned deeper but nodded slowly. "Am I in trouble?" Inko stopped and kneeled down next to him. "Baby, your quirk is powerful, and there are people who will want to use it, so we have to make sure that they don't know about it too soon or you won't be ready." "Oh," muttered Izuku. "If I get better with my quirk, can I tell people and be a hero?" Inko sighed. Her son really had a one-track mind. If you master that quirk, you can do anything you want, and yes, you most certainly can be a hero. But for now, Don't talk about it too much or tell people everything, okay? Okay, shouted Izuku with a wide grin. The rest of the day was his mother nervously filling out papers and naming his quirk in the registry, then his celebratory dinner. He talked to his dad over the phone, then went to play in his room. His mother was in a quiet conversation with his dad, but he didn't care because he had a quirk and he could be a hero. Like All Might. He always thought back to that day as the years passed. It has been over 10 years and he never forgot his mother's worried face or the doctor's crazed laugh. It was funny to think about. Back when his quirk first manifested, he truly didn't understand how powerful it was. In fact, he used to be upset that he couldn't lift more than 5 kilograms. But at the behest of his mother he studied sciences, specifically atomic sciences, and while it took him years to really understand what he was reading, when he did, he understood just what he was blessed with. His quirk had 2 ironclad rules. He could only lift things that weighed exactly 5 kilograms or less, even a milligram over, and it was impossible to move. His range of control started at just 5 meters, with training he's increased to 11 meters. However, the further out the less fine of control he has. Other than those 2 rules he hasn't found a single limitation, and he has done some wild things. He created gold from minerals. Granted, it was a small amount as he can't influence matter to that level yet, but it was a 24-karat square of gleaming gold. He has created a diamond from coal. He can turn the air around him into water, then freeze it into ice, and with a flick of his finger vaporized the ice into nothing. But the most insane things he's manipulated was himself. Izuku clenched his fist with a subtle grin. To be a hero you needed to be strong in some way. His quirk was one of the most powerful in the world, but it was also very subtle. So, he needed something that was good for physical combat. After all, he was just a normal person and couldn't win a fist fight with people with combative quirks. He started with his bones. With study and careful preparation, and a full 26 hours of focus, he turned his bones into something else. They were far more durable but even more streamlined. He took inspiration from carbon fiber and titanium, compacting the building blocks of his bones so tight it would take something incredible to even crack a small one. From there he went to his muscles. Denser, each and every fiber being better than the absolute peak of a normal person. He could lift tons. His thoughts moved throughout his body. While he only finished his muscle manipulation and enhancements last week, he was looking at what else he wanted to change. He has been studying the human body extensively, and he was looking at his senses. See further, process faster, hear even better, and so on. If he could do that, then he would be set. He had a powerful and adaptive quirk and his body wouldn't be vulnerable like most emitter types. But perhaps the most incredible thing he's accomplished with his quirk is how he's able to heal. Any injury to himself he can stitch back together instantly. He could heal well enough to remove scars and recreate blood and tissue, so as long as he could focus, he could heal. His mother was right all those years ago. His quirk was powerful, and he could see how people would want to use his gift for themselves. Settle down. His teacher shouted over the rowdy class, bringing him from his thoughts. I know that all of you are excited, but we need to talk about potential high schools. Ah. Who am I kidding? You all want to go to the hero programs. The class roared at that, and Izuku chuckled to himself. He found the energy infectious and couldn't help grinning. But before anyone could really say anything, an explosion sounded off. Now don't you go lumping me in with all these extras, shouted an arrogant voice to Izuku's right. I've got top scores, the best quirk to come out of this shithole of a school, and I'm destined for UA. The voice belonged to Katsuki Bakugo, his former friend turned class asshole. Many of the class booed his words for calling them extras, while Izuku just rolled his eyes. Bakugo was too arrogant for his liking. He was a promising hero candidate, but he didn't have any real chance of being number 1. No one would ever like him that much. The teacher nodded lazily. And it would seem like Midoriya also applied for UA. Izuku nodded. I aced all the mock tests too, and I'm very confident that I will pass, he said with a smile. Most of the class didn't know what to say to that. Many of them knew he had a telekinetic quirk, but not the extent of it. Many have never even seen him use it, but they knew he was smart, so if he was confident then all they could really do was shrug. Except for one student. "What?" roared Bakugo, jumping from his desk. "Deku. You think you can just apply to UA? Trash like you should just stay out of my way. You hear me? I'm the only one who'll get into UA." He got up to rush his desk, but Izuku just ignored him. The teacher was quick to get the room under control. "Bakugo, get back into your seat. No quirk usage at school, you know that." Reluctantly, Bakugo sat back down but was glaring at him pretty hard. Izuku just ignored him as best he could while writing into his hero notebook. Class ended after a while, and right as Izuku was about to walk out of class, he was grabbed by the shoulder. Looking over, it was by his long-fingered classmate whose name he couldn't remember. The fat flying one was next to him while Bakugo stepped in front of him. Rolling his eyes, he looked at Bakugo while slapping the hand off his shoulder. "What do you want, Bakugo?" "I have to get home," he asked with a frown. Bakugo actually snarled at that. "I'm warning you now, don't apply to UA. I don't want my greatness pulled down by your pathetic existence." He raised a hand and set off a few firecracker pops for intimidation. Izuku looked at the hand before tilting his head and raising his own hand. Focusing intently, he molded the building blocks of the universe, creating what he needed, changing and creating a substance for this singular purpose. Barely 15 seconds passed before similar pops and cracks exploded off of his palm, mirroring Bakugo. "Did I do it right?" Izuku asked with a raised eyebrow. "Nitroglycerin, right? I think I did it right. If that's all, I'm going to go." The look of shock on Bakugo's face was enough that Izuku could brush past him with no trouble and leave the classroom. If he were honest, that was one of the most liberating things he's ever done. Only 3 people besides himself really knew what his quirk was, and he's been extra careful not to show it off. Now that he was older and stronger thanks to his self-enhancements, he wasn't scared to flex a bit. Not to mention, pushing back against Bakugo was a nice feeling. The boy was just too arrogant for his liking, too different from the Kaken that used to be his friend. On his way home, he thought about his plans for UA. The test was in a bit under 10 months, and he needed to be ready for anything. Maybe instead of neural enhancements, he should focus on defenses and functional processes like organ efficiencies. It would be delicate, but it was doable. Walking under the underpass, Izuku didn't notice the sewer grate open behind him as a green sludge poured from it. A massive amount of green sludge surged forward and enveloped Izuku, trying to sink its body into him. A nice invisibility cloak. "Stop squirming, it'll go faster." The sludge growled as it tried to take him over. Izuku glared at the sludge before reaching out with his power, and the molecular forces bent to his will. Before the sludge knew what was happening, his body was frozen in place, allowing Izuku to brute force his way out with a flex. Izuku grinned down at his body. If that wasn't proof enough of his strength, then he didn't know what was. "Oh yeah, I can be a hero," he muttered to himself with a grin as he clenched his fist. "I'll say." A voice boomed from behind him. "You made that look easy, young man. That one even gave me a bit of trouble," the booming voice said with a laugh. Izuku spun around with a look of shock and awe. His idol was standing in front of him. "All Might. I never thought. What are you?" "What?" Izuku's brain shorted out as he stared at the grinning face that he's looked up to since he was capable of thought. "Ah ha ha. Young man, I have to say that was some impressive work. You didn't panic and saved yourself. Why, if more citizens were like you, then we heroes would be out of a job," praised All Might with his signature grin. Getting himself under control, Izuku took a deep breath. "Thank you, All Might. I didn't know what was happening. He just tried to take control of my body and I broke free because I didn't want him to," he finished lamely. He knew that he would potentially be in trouble for using his quirk on someone. Self-defense or not, the laws were kind of ridiculous when quirks were involved. He calmed when All Might just nodded in response. All Might looked over at the villain with a hum. "Well, I have to say I don't know how to bring him in when he's a block of ice. I don't want to kill him, and he doesn't look too solid." Izuku perked up at that. "I can undo it or harden it if you'd like." All Might looked back with surprise before smiling wider. "Undo it so I may apprehend this villain." Izuku backed up a few steps and raised his arm in the direction of the villain. Focus and control. The frozen sludge cracked, and then a second later the ice was gone, and the viscous villain was back to normal, and it was looking around clearly dazed from the process. For most of his life Izuku had thought he was powerful, his quirk could and likely was in the top 1%. But he couldn't even finish blinking before All Might had the villain secured. The sheer speed and control the man possessed was incredible. It was certainly humbling to watch, not that he could even see it. "How?" muttered Izuku, but it was drowned out by All Might's booming laughter. "Impressive work, young man. But with that I need to dash." Before he could finish that thought, a cloud of steam exploded out and All Might's form was revealed to be a skeletal man with sunken features with blood pouring from his mouth. "Go, shit." Izuku just looked at him with wide eyes and complete shock. "All Might? Damn, I was afraid of this. I was in that sewer longer than I thought." "Hey kid, you okay?" the skinny All Might asked. "What happened to you? Is this your quirk? Can you transform?" Izuku muttered. He and the rest of the world could never figure out the man's quirk. It could have been invulnerability or super strength. No one knew for sure. The skinny All Might groaned. "Not quite, look," he said while lifting his shirt to show a truly terrible scar. "With my injury I can't maintain myself for longer than a few hours a day. What I do is suck in some air and puff out my chest." "That makes no sense," thought Izuku with incredulity. Looking at the injury, he knew that he couldn't completely heal it. That would be practically impossible at his current level, but he could maybe ease his pain. Izuku stepped forward and pointed his hand at the injury, while All Might dropped his shirt back down and looked at him with a frown. Reaching out, Izuku sensed the true level of damage done to his idol. "I could help," Izuku muttered as he continued to sense. "Really bad stuff. Lungs, stomach, both need extensive work." "That's right," All Might said with surprise. "How do you know that?" Izuku snapped out of it and looked up in surprise. "I said that out loud?" All Might nodded. "You did. Now how do you know that?" "I assumed you had an ice or freezing quirk." The unasked question was obvious. Izuku looked around nervously. He really didn't know what to do, but he had two thoughts. First, he knew that he was old enough to tell people what he could do within reason. Second was that All Might was one person he was sure was a 100% good person. So, with that in mind, "My quirk is telekinesis, of anything that weighs less than 5 kilograms," said Izuku with a look. It took a moment before Izuku's actions and his description clicked in the hero's head. "Wow, kid, I don't know what to tell you, but that is one special quirk." Izuku nodded. "I don't really tell people what I can do because of the attention I'd get. But I think I can help you. That injury looks really bad and I know a thing or two about the human body." To emphasize his point, Izuku lashed out with a kick to the side of the underpass, making a large spidering crack in the concrete. All Might looked at the wall with surprise as he connected the dots. "You enhanced yourself?" he asked with incredulity. Izuku nodded. "I want to be the best hero possible, so I'm doing everything I can to accomplish that." He was actually quite proud of his work. Only his mother knew what he's done. So, it was nice to show off for once. All Might had just become even more surprised hearing that. "Kid, that sounds like it was a delicate process that you could have easily messed up on. Tell me someone knows you've done this to yourself?" "My mom, and I plan on doing more. But anyway, I can help you if you'd let me," Izuku said with a large smile on his face. Just the thought of helping his idol would make his year. "No. His whole life." All Might shook his head. "I think I'm going to have to pass on that for now, young man. But I'd like to know your name." Izuku blushed at having realized that he never introduced himself to his idol. "Oh. I'm sorry. My name is Izuku Midoriya, and I will be a hero. I plan to go to UA. I have a feeling you will." All Might said with a grin. "Good luck and work hard. I'm sure you'll make a fine hero one day." The two parted ways on a good note, All Might taking in the villain and Izuku having a story for his grandchildren. As he walked home, he froze in shock. Nearly 10 minutes he was talking with All Might, the number one, his hero, his idol, his inspiration, and he never got an autograph. "No!" wailed Izuku. It took a surprisingly long time for him to get over his mistake enough to get home. To think he could stand so close to All Might and not get an autograph. He was ashamed of all fans. He was too ashamed to go onto the forums and debate with Fars 1 GHT 420 about obscure All Might trivia. After dinner, Inko had enough and walked up to him with a frown. "Okay, young man, what has gotten into you? You've been moping all afternoon?" she asked with worry. She was a gentle woman, and as her son grew up, she only got more worried about his impending life as a hero. She was glad he had such a strong quirk, at least she knew that he would be well equipped. But that didn't save her from her chronic worrying. Izuku groaned. "I met All Might, Mom. I met him. He was so close I could slap him." And tears welled in his eyes as he stared up at him. "Mother, I forgot to get an autograph," he wailed. "What?" Inko muttered in confusion, then rolled her eyes. "Of course, that's the problem. How did you meet All Might?" she asked after realizing what he said. Izuku calmed down and took a breath. "I was attacked by a villain and he showed up after I stopped it." "Actually, maybe he shouldn't have." "What?" shouted Inko before practically teleporting to him to look him over. "Are you okay? Did the villain hurt you? Did it touch you?" Izuku flinched back with a grimace. "What? No. What are you talking about?" "I was attacked by a slime villain, like he was made of slime, so I froze it. Then All Might showed up saying he'd been chasing it for a while." His mom really needed to calm down, honestly. Inko sunk into the couch. "Thank goodness, you know how dangerous it is out there. What if someone grabbed you and tried to do something to you?" "I think I'm gonna be alright, Mom. I've become pretty strong, you know," he said while sending a look to his mom. Hearing that, his mom sighed. "I know, but I just can't stop worrying. You know how I am." Both of them calmed down enough that Inko looked back at her son. "I'm sure that you'll get another chance for an autograph dash." "Wah! I can't believe I let my chance go," wailed Izuku in anguish, making his mother sigh. With his disastrous, shameful "no," he was over it. With that day behind him. With that day behind him, it was time to refocus on his ambition. Getting into UA. He had a little under 10 months to prepare himself, and he had decided on something that he overlooked in his years growing up. Fighting experience. While he didn't plan on becoming a street brawler type, he couldn't overlook the fact that he had strength greater than some minor strength-enhancing quirks, and he needed to learn to control it. After school, he was going to look into a dojo, or training club, or whatever was out there that could help him. In the meantime, he had class to deal with. With class came Bakugo, and with Bakugo came. Izuku flinched back as a loud explosion came from right behind him. He didn't feel anything, but it was very loud. Turning around, he glared at Bakugo. "What do you want? Can I go to class in peace?" he said with a frown. Honestly, the guy was obsessed with him. "Deku," he growled, "what the hell was that yesterday? You think I didn't notice what you did? You copied me, my quirk. You lied about your quirk, didn't you? You think you can look down on Dash? I'm going to stop you right there," interrupted Izuku, getting actual steam to come out of Bakugo's ears in his anger. "You have to realize that I don't have to tell you anything, right? You're not my family or friend. You know that, right? It's very important to me that you realize I don't owe you anything." Izuku didn't bother correcting him about his quirk. Honestly, let him think what he wants. But really, did Bakugo think he was supposed to tell him every little thing about his life and ask permission about things? He was delusional if he did. "Did you just interrupt me, Deku?" growled Bakugo while reaching forward with crackling palms. "It's time you understand your place, you useless piece of trash. I'm the only one who'll dash." Izuku slapped away the hand and pushed past him. "I don't have time for this." The bell for class rang and Bakugo realized that he needed to get to class himself and put down his hands with muttered threats under his breath. Sitting at his desk, Izuku hummed to himself while looking through his notebook, specifically the one about his quirk. So far, he was capable of many things, But time was the issue. New things took longer to do, so he started practicing changing different things or creating things so that he could do them quickly. So far, water was what he was fasted with. He could create it out of nothing, freeze it, unfreeze it, and so on. It was his go-to, and it saved him against the slime villain. He planned on practicing the process of weakening and strengthening objects or even people. If he wanted to get inside of somewhere, he could manipulate the walls to allow him in, or to defend, he could strengthen things. If he came across someone with an armor quirk, he'd need to find a way to fight it, and weakening the bonds was the best he could think of other than just pounding away with his strength. Next, he was going to work on creating objects, which was going to be very difficult. To create something from essentially nothing, it meant that he needed to manipulate atoms to create it from quite literally the ground up. Possible, but just so very difficult. So far, he can create water, but there was enough in the air that it wasn't too hard. He's also made sand and wood from nothing, but both took a lot of focus. Shaping would be easy, but the materials were what was going to take practice, and that was one of the things he was going to have to work on. He'll just have to go through the periodic table until he got them all down. From there, everything should be easy. In theory, at least, hopefully. His goal would be a sword and shield. If he can make one from nothing for the exam, then he'll consider his level 1 creation training complete. Last was just plain old combat, punches and kicks, grabs and so on. Yeah, he needed help. Actually, there was a girl in his class that was a martial artist, so he'd ask her after school. With that thought, school started and his teacher began talking. The day went like all the others, monotonous and unnecessary. Rushing after the crowd of his classmates, he found who he was looking for, Umeshi Akemi. She was a well-built girl, visible muscles and short black hair gave off the impression of tough tomboy. Umeshi, Izuku called, making the girl in question look at him curiously. I had a few questions I wanted to ask you. Well, what is it, Midoriya? She asked with an impatient frown. Izuku pushed down the annoyance at her tone but worked through it. I wanted to look into physical training, specifically martial arts. I know you practice them, so I was wondering if there are any places you recommend? Umeshi perked up at that, wanting to get some fighting experience. Midoriya, she said with a smirk, why don't you come down to the fight dojo? They teach a bit of everything there, but the goal is in the name, you learn to fight. That sounds perfect. Is that where you go? Yeah, nodded Umeshi. I go to a few places, but fight dojo is the best when I just want to wail on people. Her smirk took a more viscous turn and Izuku felt he understood why people were a bit intimidated by her. Umeshi gave him the information on the dojo and Izuku sent the information to his mother and told her he would be home late. Fight Dojo was a large 6-story building with the first and second floor having a top-of-the-line gym while the upper floors weren't visible from the ground level. If he were to be honest, he was kind of intimidated by the look of it. While he was pretty confident that he could win because of his enhancements, he was sure that he was below novice level. Walking in, he was met with the second largest man he's ever met, who giving the front desk worker some papers. He was well over 6 feet tall and every muscle on his body was well defined. He was wearing a gi with a black belt and his head was bald. How can I help you, young man? He asked, and his low baritone voice was as deep as Izuku was expecting. I was hoping to apply to the martial arts program or whatever it's called here. I heard you don't teach just one thing. Izuku said with some uncertainty. The man nodded with a grin. I see, well, you've come to the right place. I teach my students how to fight, be it with their quirk or with a martial art. Tell me why you wish to fight. Izuku firmed himself up. I'm going to be a hero and I know that the job is dangerous, and I will need to know how to fight. I have more than enough strength, I need control. The man perked up when he mentioned strength. You have enough, you say, you have a good build, but nothing is perfect. Tell me your name. Izuku blushed at forgetting to introduce himself yet again. Izuku Midoriya, sir. And I didn't mean to sound cocky, but with my quirk my body has plenty of strength. I just want to know how to control it because it's so new to me. I see, the man hummed. My name is Ryujin, and this is my dojo. If you wish to join, then follow me. Ryujin didn't leave time to say anything and Izuku rushed to follow him towards the central stairs. They walked up to the second level where a lot of machines were being used by people working out as they continued up to the third level. This was a more open floor with lots of mats and people with GIs sparring with each other. "This is the beginner floor. I will pair you up with someone to test you," said Ryujin while gesturing to another boy. "You don't have a GI, but remove your shoes and whatever you feel is too restricting." Izuku threw off his red shoes and took off the outer part of his school uniform, leaving a white undershirt. He'll leave the pants since he didn't want to fight in his underwear. Honestly, he could easily change his clothes, but he wasn't too keen on drawing attention to himself just yet. Stepping into the center mat, Izuku limbered up, trying to mimic some of the others who were doing stretches. Good thing about his enhanced bones and muscles was that they were always primed and ready no matter what, but everyone else didn't know that. Ryujin stepped in front of him. "You will be sparring with another hero applicant. He is new to this place like you. Kaminari Denki, come forward." From the crowd of people, a blonde boy walked forward. He didn't look cocky, but he was confident. He had a black streak in his hair shaped like a lightning bolt, and his GI had a white belt showing his novice level. "Now I want both of you to do your best to knock the other off the mat or force them to submit. I will authorize the use of quirks, but don't make me stop this because you went crazy." At that he sent a look at Kaminari, who scratched the back of his head. Ryujin looked over at Izuku. "You said you were strong?" At Izuku's nod he went to stand off the mat. "Kaminari, you're against a strength enhancer. Midoriya, you're up against lightning generation. Begin." Kaminari, being the more confident of the two, rushed toward Izuku to begin the fight. Izuku watched him approach, confident in his abilities. Kaminari did a solid straight right punch that Izuku caught and sent a weak punch in response. However, Izuku truly didn't realize the level he was on physically, as a weak punch still flew fast enough and with enough force to knock Kaminari off his feet with a grunt. Izuku winced and looked at his fist. He didn't put too much into that, but it was still too much. He really needed to lean to control his strength. Kaminari shot back to his feet with yellow lightning sparking off his body. "You're pretty strong. But I won't hold back anymore." Izuku braced himself for a shocking hand-to-hand fight, but instead a wave of yellow lightning exploded out from Kaminari, with him being the epicenter. Izuku frowned at the clear lack of control. The lightning hit his body, but his increased hardiness allowed him to shrug it off without much issue. Izuku decided to go onto the offense and rushed forward. Kaminari grimaced and took a rudimentary stance with yellow lightning crackling off of his body. Izuku swerved and sent a kick to Kaminari's midsection that was dodged, but Izuku's body was beyond human, his balance and flexibility more than normal. Quickly adapting to the missed kick, he twirled into a punch that sunk into Kaminari's stomach, knocking him off of the mat, ending the match. "That was actually easy. I didn't even need to use my quirk. I could have countered the lighting by using air molecules, but I wasn't even that affected by his quirk," mused Izuku while marveling at his body's abilities. The sound of clapping brought Izuku from his thoughts as he looked over at a grinning Ryujin. "That was impressive, Midoriya. I can tell you pulled your punches. Just how strong are you?" he asked. Izuku looked down and thought, he really didn't know. He knew that he could lift a car, but that was about it. Not sure, couple tons I think. Really, between his bones and muscles his strength was beyond most of humanity. Only strong enhancer types could beat him in terms of force. "We'll have to work on your technique, cause from what I saw it was non-existent. You don't use your body right in your strikes and there's a lot of wasted movement. But we'll get it right," he said with a nod before turning toward Kaminari. "I will say it again, you need to find another way to use that quirk. It has no control. Other than that, I could see real improvement in your form. It just didn't help against someone so much stronger." Kaminari ducked his head. "Yeah, but my quirk is like impossible to control once I bring it out, no matter what I try," he said with a sigh. Izuku on the other hand tilted his head and thought, "But you held it in your hand?" he said, getting both Kaminari and Ryujin to look at him. "I mean, from what I know about emitters is they are usually one of two types, outer or inner manipulation. During the fight I thought you were going to coat your hand in lightning, but instead you shot it out. Maybe try controlling it internally?" Kaminari pursed his lips. "Really? Are you dash? Genius." shouted Ryujin with a massive grin. He quickly turned to Kaminari. Your fighting has always been focused on flashiness and high damage. You produce internally and then expel, but there was no control once it left your body. So obviously all the control was internal. We need to make it so you surround yourself with your lightning. It would be like getting into a fist fight with a taser. Wow! Exclaimed Kaminari. I've never thought of that. I always wanted to make like a lightning sword or something. Ryujin snorted. You usually just blast out as much lightning as possible and hope for the best. Kaminari grumbled to himself at that. Thanks for the tip, dude, I appreciate it, he said to Izuku before walking off while staring at his hand. Ryujin shook his head before turning to Izuku. From what I saw, you need the fundamentals, like throwing punches and kicks, blocks and parries and so on. Izuku nodded. Yeah, I don't have any experience fighting. Well, that will change pretty quick here, he said with a grin. You're required to fight at least once a week to keep your membership. But most fight every day. His grin turned feral at the end. Izuku replicated the grin as best he could, although he felt a bit more nervous than excited. He had a feeling that his strength wouldn't matter in the coming weeks. Moaned Izuku as he put ice on his head. He was right when he felt nervous about fighting at the dojo. Master Ryujin didn't hesitate to throw him against more experienced fighters. In terms of fighting, Izuku was in a catch-22 situation, seeing as how he was too strong for someone at his level but not good enough to fight people who could fight through his strength. So Ryujin just expected him to get good enough to fight the more experienced fighters, while fighting them. Even if he was thrown to the ground every 5 seconds. Even if his poor head was throbbing for the whole training session. Oh well, he'd overcome this like he will everything else. It was hard for now, but he was training and getting better with every fight. Even if it wasn't too noticeable. For now, it was time to focus on his next big portion of training. Learning to create from nothing. His quirk was capable of damn near anything, but the problem was that he was in complete control. Quirks that can make things usually went off the imagination of the user, meaning that all the tiny little details were skipped over, but with that came limitations. Like Pixie Bob of the wild pussycats who could manipulate Earth to an impressive degree over a huge range. But she could only manipulate Earth and couldn't produce it. Not his quirk. Matter manipulation was incredibly precise and left everything to the user, i.e. him. With that meant that he could do anything, but it also meant that every little detail was up to him, which meant things took a lot of knowledge and focus. With time he would get better at doing things, but at the moment if he wanted to do something intricate, he had to be careful or it flat out wouldn't work. So, with that he was going to memorize all the elements of the periodic table. If he could make them seamlessly, then he had a large part of the building process out of the way. But even one element would take a while to master. Lots of upfront work, but the payoff would be incredible. So, with that in mind, he needed to study the makeup of every element, then go from there. Hydrogen and oxygen were already well under his control, so he had 2 down. First, he would learn iron, then titanium, silver, gold, then finally tungsten. He could only produce 5 kilograms worth of material at once, but he could manipulate anything once it was created. Also, he didn't plan on making a massive sword and shield anyway. But they would be damn near indestructible, maybe some armor plating that he could form around himself at a moment's notice. Although, seeing Kaminari use his quirk made him realize that he was within the realm of creating elemental reactions. He could easily see himself making a bolt of lightning, a stream of fire, or a pressurized air cannon. Again, it would be delicate and would take a lot of practice, but it was doable. So, with that, Izuku sat on the floor of his room and researched the first metal element he wanted to make. The atomic makeup of iron consisted of 26 protons and 30 neutrons, which would be bound by 26 electrons. Writing it out, then drawing it on paper, gave him a better picture of what he was doing. After about an hour of study and drawing, he was ready to try. He could feel the building blocks of the universe answer his call, moving thousands upon thousands of micro-sized objects. He made many errors, being fractions of a fraction of a fraction of a millimeter off, causing one of them to fail, causing him to fix the surrounding atoms, but it wasn't too strenuous. With every completed atom he got a tiny bit faster and a tiny bit more precise. 15 minutes. It took 15 minutes, but after all that time, he made a milligram of pure iron. As he made it himself from literally nothing, it had no impurities. It was a tiny perfect sphere and it rested in the palm of his hand. He did it. He created it from nothing. He may have just realized how incredible of a quirk he had. Altering himself, that was awesome, but it took years of study and prep just to make himself as strong as an enhancer, and granted he could heal, but so could so many. But this, he made something from nothing, just focus. He could do anything. Wow. I need to lay down, thought Izuku. Iron was possible, which meant every element was possible, which meant anything was possible. Now he could understand the crazed laughter of the doctor and his mother's worry. But on the other hand, he couldn't hold back a grin. A massive grin that took over his face, a grin that just realized his full potential. He wasn't going to ever stop improving. He would keep going until he hit a wall, and that wall was already known to him, the 5 kilograms limit. That was the only thing stopping him from shaping the world how he wished. Changing the land to fit him or altering the very earth to fit his desires. He could only go 5 kilograms at a time, which meant that he would have to stick to gases and plasma for large-scale effects. Gas. Maybe I could try to recreate Midnight's gas to knock people unconscious. Thoughts for later, mused Izuku. Okay, it was time to work through how that went. He already had a few thoughts. First, the amount of focus it took for 1 milligram of iron was more than he expected, which meant he needed practice and a lot of it. Second, the strain on his head to focus that intently was enough that he was kind of tired. Though this could be mitigated by neural enhancements through biological manipulation or stamina training. Third, holding his creation in his hand made him realize that it was far easier to mold than something he just picked up off the ground. The small sphere of iron changed to a small cube, then a pyramid, without much effort on his end. Fourth, and the most insane of his observations. The creation of matter did not require any input. Meaning he didn't need to give fuel or payment to create, he just did it. He would have to keep this to himself. Rare and valuable resources like rhodium, palladium, iridium and gold could be created in a matter of minutes, to which he could then sell. Each of them going for nearly 5 million yen per kilogram, meaning he could make 25 million yen per batch without having to give anything in exchange. Again, he'd keep this part to himself. Making notes of his discoveries in his personal notebook, he laid down on his bed, being careful to keep the ice pack in place. It was 7 months into his training and 3 months away from the UA entrance exam that something insane happened. Izuku was sitting at the dinner table after a hard day of studying, while adding to the perfect sphere of gold floating above his palm. He had already worked through most of the elements that he wanted to be able to create before the exam. These last few weeks he was working on the speed at which he made them. At the moment he could create a kilogram of matter in 9 minutes, and it was a difficult 9 minutes. Not fast enough to be feasible yet, but he was getting there. He could see his goal in the distance. The average sword weights between 1.5 and 3 kilograms depending on the size and make. A shield weighed a bit more, but it was still well under his limit of single unit creation. A couple of loud knocks on the door echoed through the apartment, and he heard his mother rush to answer the door. He could hear voices but didn't pay attention to them as he focused on the floating orb of gold. Wow, you weren't kidding, Toshinori. A grizzled voice said as he and a very familiar gaunt blonde entered the dining room, followed nervously by his mother. This older man was curiously short. He wore a simple shirt and slacks, had a gray beard and used a cane to walk. The second was all might in his small gaunt form, wearing a dress shirt and loose cargo pants. Both men and his mother had their eyes on the gleaming orb of gold, causing him to realize what he was doing and who was in front of him. He set the gold on the table and calmly tore through his apartment towards his room. He faintly heard sounds of confusion and his mother's nervous assurances as he grabbed his notebook and rushed back. Autograph. he wailed as he pushed his notebook into the face of his hero, much to the shock of his mother and exasperation of the small elderly man. All Might nervously stared at the notebook before signing it. Izuku snatched it back and stared at the signature with watery eyes before repeating his earlier frantic movements to put the notebook back. A minute later, his two guests were staring at him with bizarre looks on their faces. His mother left to continue cooking and he was calmly sipping his drink, pretending that his earlier actions never happened. All Might cleared his throat and calmed down. "Well, we can just move past that," he said, getting a snort from the old man. "Oh, this is Gran Torino. He taught me back in UA. I came to speak to you about what you said when we met. About the possibility of healing." Izuku nodded. "Yes, I'm not sure if I can completely heal you yet. I don't have experience creating organs, but I can certainly repair anything." Gran Torino interrupted there. "Well, Toshinori here didn't tell me your quirk, just that he's been obsessing over the possibility that you might be able to heal him. But from what I just saw, it looks like some sort of telekinesis." Izuku could tell he was asking for an explanation. Also, Izuku felt gratitude toward All Might that he didn't share anything about his quirk with someone he was clearly close to. "My quirk can do many things, and rather than give you the runaround, I'll just say it. My quirk is matter manipulation, so I'm not held down by the limitations of a healing quirk. But I'm curious," continued Izuku, "why did you turn away my offer back then? Also, why is Gran Torino here?" "Not that I minded, more curiosity than anything." "Well," started All Might with a cough, "I wasn't about to trust someone with a potentially dangerous procedure minutes after meeting them." Izuku had the decency to blush at that. "Also, Gran Torino is here because frankly he decided to follow me after I told him what I was planning on doing, and he kinda does whatever he wants." The last part was said with a nervous grimace. But All Might continued before Gran Torino could say anything. "But I haven't been able to not think about it. For all this time I've been wondering if what you said was true. I looked into you, model student, and you have clear aspirations of being a hero. So, I didn't think it'd be too much trouble to speak to you again. Also, I was a bit worried about you too, young Midoriya." Izuku looked at him in surprise. "Why? I don't go looking for villains, that was just happenstance." No, said All Might with a wave. "I meant what you said you did to yourself. I was going to ask if you've had a professional look you over." "Well, I'm sure," started Izuku, "but he hasn't," shouted his mother from the kitchen. Izuku blushed and looked away from the two men. "Yeah, she's been trying to get me to a doctor to make sure that I'm all working, but I'm sure I'm fine." He shouted the last part toward the kitchen. "Also, I don't like to show off my quirk if I can help it. Especially what I'm capable of." "What did he do?" asked Gran Torino. "Is it crazier than creating what I can only guess is an enormous ball of pure gold?" he asked with incredulity. "Well, that depends," started Izuku. "I altered my body, enhancing my bones and muscles by manipulating densities and atomic bonds. It was difficult, but worth it." "Oh, so you're as crazy as Toshinori." "Got it," nodded Torino with a snort, "but I will say if he can do that then I wouldn't doubt his abilities. Also, he doesn't look threatening, so I got what I wanted from this meeting." Izuku looked at him with a frown and raised eyebrow while All Might coughed into his hand. "Well," started All Might with a cough, "I was going to offer to bring you to a doctor I trust implicitly with all my medical information. She is discreet and won't spread information about your quirk. I was also hoping you could work with her to heal me," he said before quickly adding, "as best you can, of course." Izuku nodded and he could practically feel his mother telepathically telling him that he needed to see this doctor for a physical anyway. "Okay, I'll go along with that. Who is it?" All Might's grin spread through his whole gaunt face and Izuku could feel the gratitude from the man. If he were honest, it hurt to see his hero in this state, so that was just fuel to his desire to help him. "Excellent!" All Might exclaimed, "If you're free we can go tomorrow. Also, the doctor in question is actually a hero, recovery girl. She's been my personal doctor for quite a few years now." "Tomorrow is fine," Izuku said with a smile, "but while you're here can I give you a scan? Feel like I should ask even though you don't have to really do anything other than sit there." Gran Torino looked interested while All Might gave him the go-ahead. Mentally reaching out, Izuku felt through All Might's body for all injuries and ailments. First, he noticed that his stomach was practically non-existent. He'd need to completely build him a new one, which would not be easy. Especially considering he's never created an organ from scratch, but he'd give it his best shot. Next thing he noticed was his respiratory system. Lots of stress injuries, one lung just flat out didn't work and had enough holes in it to call it a net. Good news on that though was that there was enough existing tissue that he'd just need to fix it rather than create a new one. His throat didn't look too good and his diaphragm also needed just a whole lot of work to fix. Actually, the only thing that wasn't broken was his nasal cavity. All Might, muttered Izuku with a frown, I gotta ask, what happened? You really shouldn't be alive and much less still operating as a hero with these injuries. In fact, if you continue in this condition, I wouldn't be shocked if you lost your big form permanently. You know what, at this point the strain may be shortening your life. Both Gran Torino and All Might grimaced with dark looks coming over their faces. Ah, you don't have to tell me. It's just shocking that someone could hurt you this bad. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen you injured before. Izuku said with a grimace. That got a sigh out of the two and they shared a quick look. It happened about 5 years ago, started All Might with a frown. I was fighting a villain and he was the deadliest I have ever come across and I gave everything I had and even then, I was barely able to win. I was a breath away from death. Put it this way, kid, Gran Torino interjected, anyone other than Toshinori would be paced, hell he almost was. Sounds actually horrifying, thought Izuku with a bit of sweat forming on his back. Wanting to change the subject, Izuku took a deep breath. Okay. Well, I'm not a doctor, but I'm telling you not to go into your big form until after we're done. Those are the I'm not really a doctor but doctor's orders. He tried to say sternly, but his expression came off as more of a nervous grimace. Gran Torino smirked, and All Might let loose a chuckle. So, what were you doing when we got here? Asked Gran Torino. Obviously he had been wanting to ask for a while, based on the gleam in his eye. Oh, Izuku stammered, well, I was training my quirk, I'm trying to master creating metals. And you started with gold? Gran Torino asked with an unimpressed look. No, today was just gold day. Izuku said quickly, I alternate between iron, titanium, silver, gold, then tungsten. This was why he didn't want to show that off. Now Gran Torino and All Might were gonna think he was using his quirk to get rich quick, not very heroic at all. Relax, kid, shouted Gran Torino. I was kidding. Seriously, you're too tense about that quirk of yours. He finished with a snort. All Might on the other hand was impressed, so you can create those metals, from what? Izuku smirked and raised a finger, from the tip a small orb of gold started spinning into existence. It was barely a marble but was quickly growing in size. Again, it was really nice to show off for once. After a couple of seconds, it weighed exactly 1 gram. Again, months of practice turned 15 minutes of focus for 1 milligram to a couple seconds for a gram improvement. With a flick of his finger the small marble melded into the large sphere. When he looked up, he saw the looks of surprise on both of their faces. Pretty cool, huh? He asked with a grin. All Might nodded slowly while Gran Torino swallowed excitedly. Can you make food? Fish sticks specifically? Dinner's almost ready. His mother shouted from the kitchen. That was the first time Gran Torino smiled. All Might, thank you very much. Can't wait. I'm starved. All Might added with a smile. Seriously, shouted Izuku as he fell out of his chair. He got no respect. This is it for today, to be continued. Stay tuned.